Good morning, folks. Chi Baker here with Street Tactical Integrations and Tricom. And today, what I want to do is cover some concepts about motherline and centerline, and for you to understand the difference between the two. And then in the next video, I'm going to talk about primary and secondary targets, how they relate to motherline and centerline, and how to help you better understand uh, how those are useful in an assaultive situation or in combat. Okay, so I'm gonna use good old tripod Bob, and I'm gonna have to manipulate him quite a bit during this video because I don't have a film crew. So, centerline. Centerline, if we're using Bob, runs down the center of his body, okay? And the centerline, for the most part, uh, we use it as a conceptual piece, and basically we use centerline mostly in terms of an orientation factor, but it's with shoulders square, hips square. Okay, so if I'm standing like this, the concept starts to change as you turn and twist the body, where things aren't necessarily square. So if I turn my body like this and this, my center line is kind of broken up. That may be more information than what's helpful for this video. So let's get back to we're just going to talk about a body being square. Okay, so eyes are square to shoulders, shoulders are square to hips. The center line runs basically from the very top of your skull, that soft spot in the skull, coming down to the center of your nose, coming down the center of your throat, down to the center of your sternum, and down to the center of your groin. Okay, so we call that your center line. Your center line is very helpful, as I've already alluded to organizing around key targeting. And we'll go into that more in the next video. My mother line is going to be only talked about in terms of a relation to your opponent, to the assailant, to your attacker. So center line, whether you're with somebody or not somebody, your center line, you have a center line. Now, mother line is if we have a string that's attached to the top of your opponent or attacker's head or skull and to the top of your head. And so this is a relationship piece. So if I'm going to turn him just slightly for the camera angle. If I am square to Bob and Bob is square to me, our center line and mother line are exactly the same. So again, a string attached from the top of my head to attach to Bob's head. Our center line and mother line are the same. Now, as Bob or I start to turn, that mother line is going to change. The center line is going to stay consistent. So if I'm here, Bob's center line is still the same, right? That center line hasn't changed. It's still running along the front of Bob's body. However, his mother line has changed, okay? So if I'm going to stay square to Bob for a second, just for reference point. So my mother line and center line is the same because I'm square to Bob, but Bob's center line is actually now running along about a 45 on his body, okay? So it's running in a different line approach. Let's see if I grab. This may or may not help visually, right? But here's his center line, and as I've moved over, his center line has shifted to here. Maybe for the camera angle, it's that if I'm here and I start to turn to here, his mother line is going to shift over, okay? So again, it's top of my head, top of Bob's head, a string. And so if that string was attached as I move, right, that string is going to shift. Okay? So just as if I'm here, facing the camera. This is my center line. It's also my mother line. But as I start to turn, right, my mother line has changed for the camera. My center line is still here. It's still running up and down the squareness of my body. So, right, nose, throat, sternum, groin. But as I've changed now, my mother line has shifted. So my mother line is now at my center line. Now it's starting to turn, starting to turn, starting to turn, starting to turn. So this is now my mother line right down here. The importance of that is starts to go of understanding the reference of where I'm at in relationship to Bob and how I might need to organize that around to find key targets, but also how to navigate balance points. Okay, this goes into one of the modules that Jared Wahangi and I are working on, which is an immobilization module. And the point of it is that if, again, I'm square to Bob, if I push Bob here, that is going to off balance Bob the most, okay? But if I'm here, me pushing on Bob here actually is not going to affect Bob as much as if I push Bob on his mother line. Okay, so now I'm pushing Bob on his mother line, and I'm going to affect his balance, his structure the most. Again, here I have, because I'm not pushing off of my mother line either, is that I'm going to have the least amount or less amount of power pushing him this way. I can't use my structure to affect his balance, and I'm not affecting his structure with his balance. If I push in alignment with my mother line to his mother line, I'm going to have the most structural power of mine, but also affect his structure the most. So whether I'm trying to pin his arm against his body, right? I want to find his mother line for that pinning. Again, if I take his arm and I pin it this way, it's going to pin, but he's going to be able to maneuver out that the easiest, and I'm not affecting his structure. If I pin his shoulder now, or his elbow, sorry, to his mother line, I'm going to affect his structure and pin the appendage the best. Okay, so again, if we're looking at affecting structure points, but also creating the best immobilization, in this case, a pin, that pinning in to the mother line is going to work the best versus coming around. Although it's right. So if I stick to the center line, if I'm pinning his arm to his center line, sure, that's going to work, but he's going to be able to get out of that immobilization faster. And the idea for most immobilizations is that we want to capitalize the longest on them versus have them effective for a split second and then them being able to work out of the immobilization. That's a much longer, broader concept that hopefully this audience is going to be interested in later on as we release that module. Okay, so that's the key about understanding center line, right? Again, center line is running right down the center, and mother line, which is in relationship, relativity to your opponent, and will move according to how one or both of us move. So it's our relationship to each other versus something that is a constant. Okay, so hopefully that gave you a good kind of understanding of the difference between center line and mother line, and some beginning understanding of how it's effective or necessary to understand in attack scenarios and how to best utilize your skill sets against your assailant. All right, guys, thank you so much. We'll catch you on the next video, which is going to be talking about primary and secondary targets, and including how motherline and centerline coordinate or are helpful to understand in relationship to those. So, all right, thank you so much again. Serve and protect your community. Keep training.